Most people think civilization began in comfort, but they've been lied to. The truth is darker. Civilization was born in a place that should have killed it. A land with no stone, no forests, no metal, no mountains, no protection. A place where floods erased villages overnight and droughts starved entire generations with mathematical precision. And yet, from this lethal landscape rose something impossible. The first cities, the first laws, the first governments, the first written records, the entire blueprint of the modern world. Here's the part almost nobody knows. Not historians, not teachers, not the documentaries you grew up watching. Mesopotamia didn't create civilization because it was blessed. It created civilization because it was trapped. Scarcity didn't limit them. It sharpened them. Danger didn't destroy them. It organized them. And the deeper you go into the tablets, the more disturbing the picture becomes. Civilization didn't rise from genius. It rose from fear, from pressure, from a land so unstable that humans were forced to invent order just to survive another season. You think you know how the world began? No. This is the story they don't teach. The story written in clay, buried for millennia, waiting for someone reckless enough to read it. Welcome to History Brought Alive, where forgotten worlds rise from the dust and ancient truths breathe again. This is Mesopotamia as revealed in world history, an epic overview. If you want more episodes, more revelations, and more stories academia buried, the link to the book is in the description. Now, let's begin. The paradox of the two rivers. Civilization didn't begin in a paradise. It began in a place where survival should have been mathematically unlikely. The first cities rose in a land with no stone, no forests, no metals, no mountains, no natural defenses, and no reason for large populations to settle there. Floods wiped out entire villages. Droughts destroyed harvests. Invaders could cross the plain as easily as walking across a floor. A cradle of civilization built in a zone where nature killed more people than enemies ever did. Why here? Why this dangerous place? Why not anywhere safer? Here is the part most people never hear. The first civilization emerged in one of the most dangerous, unstable environments on Earth. Civilization wasn't born from safety. It was born from risk. The world's first cities rose where no cities should exist. Between the Tigris and Euphrates lies a plain that appears calm, cracked soil, slow-moving water, and stretches of open horizon. Textbooks praise its fertility. They rarely mention its instability. The same rivers that delivered rich black silt also erased settlements without warning. This land offered abundance only to those who could control it, and devastation to anyone who failed. In Mesopotamia, prosperity and ruin arrived in the same flood. Most people imagine the Fertile Crescent as a cradle. In reality, it was a collision zone between nature's generosity and nature's cruelty. How did a civilization survive when its environment switched moods like a weapon? Calm landscape, violent reality. Mesopotamia's earliest farmers confronted a paradox. Water created life and threatened it simultaneously. Annual flooding brought nutrient-rich sediment, but river patterns shifted unpredictably. A prosperous settlement could lose its fields overnight. A village might wake to find the river had simply moved. This wasn't stable agriculture. It was controlled chaos. The same system that fed them could erase them at any moment. Early irrigation was not innovation for comfort. It was innovation for survival. Narrow fields forced water into controlled pathways. Crop rotation prevented soil exhaustion. Barley became the staple because it could survive conditions that killed other grains. These early farmers achieved yields comparable to 19th century Europe, 5,000 years earlier. That level of productivity created the first surpluses, and surplus created the first specialists, builders, priests, merchants, overseers. The land was flat and exposed, no hills for refuge, no forests for cover, no cliffs for defense. Armies could approach from any direction. Raids were constant. Every horizon carried threat. Mesopotamia didn't grow because it was secure. It grew because danger forced communities to organize faster than anywhere else on Earth. Why did civilization appear first here, where everything pushed against survival? Mesopotamia's apparent strength hid deep structural fragility. Too much water destroyed the fields. Too little caused famine. A single blocked canal could starve thousands. One reservoir failure could collapse a city's entire food supply. The rivers that made Mesopotamia powerful also made it permanently unstable. No timber, no stone, no metal. Every temple, every wall, every home, built from nothing but mud. Scarcity forced relentless innovation. Engineered canals, ration systems, labor records, standardized measures, early taxation writing, not for culture, but for survival. The world's first writing system was created to track grain, not stories. Irrigation demanded coordination. Who dug, who maintained, who received water, who paid grain tax, who managed labor. This pressure produced the earliest bureaucracies in human history. Not political governments, hydraulic governments. Order wasn't optional. It was enforced by the river. Too much coordination. Collapse. Too little. Collapse. School describes Mesopotamia as the cradle of civilization. The truth is sharper. Mesopotamia was a crucible, a place where instability forced structure, scarcity forced invention, vulnerability forced administration, danger forced collective identity. Here emerged the first cities, the first states, the first economies, the first laws, the first written records, the first large-scale bureaucracies. Civilization didn't rise because the land was generous. It rose because the land demanded organization in exchange for survival. Civilization wasn't born from abundance. It was born from desperation. Humanity's first cities were built because nature threatened them, not because nature supported them. The land forged the conditions for civilization. But what came next reshaped humanity even more. The rise of the first cities, built from mud, faith, and the pressure to endure. How do you build a city with nothing but mud and make it last 3,000 years? The engine of survival, irrigation and agriculture. The world's first large-scale engineering projects were not temples or palaces. They were irrigation canals, dug by hand, maintained under pressure, and essential for survival. Humanity's first infrastructure was built to stop nature from killing them. And here is the shock almost no one learns in school. Mesopotamian farmers produced crop yields comparable to industrial-era Europe, 5,000 years earlier. Civilization didn't begin with kings or warriors. It began with mud ditches carved into unstable soil. The first engineers weren't architects. They were farmers fighting for their lives. How did people with no metal tools build a system powerful enough to feed cities? No throne, no crown, just mud, sweat, and mathematics. After the floods retreated, the land looked carved with black veins, canals stretching across the plain, funneling water into carefully designed fields. These fields were narrow by design. Every drop mattered. Every channel had to be controlled. No machines, no metal, tools, only mud brick, reeds, and coordinated labor. What seems primitive was, in reality, one of the earliest engineered landscapes on Earth, a man-made environment built to counter nature's unpredictability. Mesopotamia wasn't farming. It was hydraulic warfare against the environment. Why did they succeed when every factor, soil, tools, climate, should have doomed them? Primitive tools, sophisticated results. Mesopotamian agriculture was not natural. It was constructed. Hand-dug channels redirected river water to distant farmlands. This alone transformed dry plains into productive zones capable of feeding tens of thousands. The land fought them. They engineered it into submission. Flood water was not endured. It was captured, saved, and rationed. Reservoirs acted as buffers against disaster, primitive but effective. Every reservoir was a life support machine built with nothing but mud. Fields were narrow to maintain more precise control of irrigation. Rotation of barley, wheat, and millet preserved soil nutrients. A single clogged channel could cause an entire region to lose its food supply. High yields created something unprecedented, more food than farmers needed. Surplus created specialists, administrators, builders, priests, early political elites. Agriculture didn't just feed cities. It created the possibility of cities. How does a mud-based system create the world's first specialization economy? Irrigation required seasonal mobilization of entire communities, digging, cleaning, repairing, distributing water. This is where the first form of administration appears, not as government, but as necessity. The earliest officials were irrigation managers, not rulers. Bureaucracy didn't descend from kings. Kings descended from bureaucrats. No water, no crops, no crops, no city, no city, no civilization. Mesopotamia's agricultural success concealed its own vulnerabilities. Floods were both lifeline and threat. Too much water destroyed fields. Too little caused famine. The system hovered constantly on the edge of failure. Prosperity depended on a river that didn't care whether they lived. Canals silted up every year. Reservoir walls eroded. Gates needed reinforcing. One season of neglect could trigger starvation. A few weeks of missed labor could collapse an entire food system. Water distribution required authority. Someone had to decide who dug, who received water, who paid grain taxes, whose fields were prioritized. This created a new type of power, hydraulic power. Hierarchy wasn't invented for ambition, it was invented for irrigation. How does managing water turn into managing people? Salt accumulation from constant irrigation slowly poisoned fields. Without careful management, fertile land turned barren. Mesopotamia was prosperous, but always one mistake away from collapse. The system that made the land fertile was also destroying it. Grow too much, salt rises. Grow too little, famine hits. The truth, almost no one, emphasizes irrigation didn't just shape agriculture, it shaped society itself. Whoever controlled the water controlled planting cycles, harvest quotas, food storage labor assignments, taxation, early law enforcement. This is why Mesopotamia produced the first administrative systems, the first economic regulations, the first written records. Writing wasn't invented for stories. It was invented for accounting, the language of water, grain, and labor. This is the overlooked reality. Mesopotamian government was created not to rule people, but to manage the rivers. Hydraulics, not politics, birthed civilization. Civilization's first law was simple: control the water, control the world. Water created the conditions for growth, but it was the rise of the cities, built on faith, organization, and the pressure to survive, that pushed humanity into a new world. What does a city look like when it's built from nothing but mud and fear? The first cities, when faith built civilization. The world's first city wasn't built for trade, defense, or political power. It was built for a god. Eridu, the earliest known city in human history, began with a shrine, not a ruler. Civilization began with prayer, not power. And here is the part school rarely makes explicit. Civilization began as a religious project, not a marketplace, not a government, a pilgrimage site. The first cities formed because people believed the divine lived there. Why would humanity's first urban experiment revolve around a single sacred point? No walls, no throne, just belief. Urban life didn't rise from necessity, it rose from devotion. Across southern Mesopotamia, early settlements clustered around sacred ground, places where people believed a deity had touched the earth. Eridu was the earliest of these, a raised mud brick platform rebuilt again and again, each layer preserving the memory of Enki, the god of freshwater and creation. The common image of a first city is wrong. It wasn't a crowded urban center. It wasn't fortified. It wasn't a seat of kings. It was a temple surrounded by modest homes, a spiritual core with a small orbit of believers. Urban life formed not because humans needed protection, but because humans believed they were standing on holy ground. The first city was a shrine with houses, nothing more. Why did people settle permanently around a ritual platform? Faith demanded permanence. Nature demanded mobility. A temple first, a city later. Eridu reveals the blueprint for humanity's earliest cities. Archaeology shows Eridu didn't grow from a village. It began as a ritual site. People visited to worship, then they stayed, then they built. This sequence repeats across early cities. Most narratives sidestep this foundation, but the evidence is clear. The world's first cities were sacred installations before they became administrative ones. Cities rose from altars, not farm. Uruk followed the same pattern, centered on the Ea goddess, Inanna. But its scale was unprecedented. By the time Egypt was still forming regional chiefdoms, Uruk already had monumental temples, administrative districts, industrial workshops, standardized production, structured neighborhoods. A population exceeding 50,000, Uruk may have been the largest city on Earth for centuries, long before kingdoms existed. How does a temple cult scale into a metropolis? As cities grew, they faced logistical pressures no village had ever experienced. Managing grain, organizing labor, tracking offerings, recording transactions, coordinating rituals, distributing resources. This strain created the first administrative class. Priests and scribes, not kings, were the earliest authorities. And here is the part most people misunderstand. The first cities were run by temples, not governments. Sacred authority collided with logistical necessity. Faith built the city. Administration kept it alive. Cities created opportunity. But they also created the first large-scale social problems in human history. Tens of thousands depended on the same granaries. A single failed harvest threatened everyone. Urban life multiplied vulnerability. One bad flood cycle could collapse an entire urban district. Hierarchy appeared almost immediately. Priests, scribes, artisans, laborers, slaves. Inequality wasn't gradual. It was built into the structure of urban life. Temples controlled land irrigation, labor justice, economic records. Early kings didn't dominate this system. They emerged beneath it. The earliest rulers were administrators serving the temple hierarchy, not the other way around. Kingship had to fight its way out of priestly shadow. Unlike later empires, early cities had no walls. The open plains made them vulnerable to raiders and rival settlements. This exposure shaped centuries of conflict. Everything was built from mud: temples, homes, walls. Mud brick decayed quickly, forcing cities to rebuild layer by layer. Those layers remain today as artificial mounds, tells that mark ancient urban centers. Urban life was a constant battle against erosion and time. How did a civilization thrive when its buildings were designed to crumble? Build, collapse, rebuild, repeat. Here is the truth hidden beneath these ruins. Cities did not emerge because humans became smarter. Cities emerged because humans became organized. Faith created the gathering point. Agriculture created the need. Administration created the structure. But inside these early cities, a psychological shift occurred. For the first time, people saw themselves as part of something larger, a city, a shared community, a collective identity. Your tribe no longer defined you. Your birthplace no longer defined you. Your village no longer defined you. Your city did. This was the birth of population-scale identity. The moment humanity transformed from isolated groups into civilizations. Cities didn't create identity. Identity created cities. A sacred platform rewired the human mind. Cities gave humanity structure, but they also ignited ambition. Next comes the rise of the first rulers and the first empires and the struggle for control that reshaped the ancient world. What happens when spiritual cities produce political ambition? The rise of power, from city temples to early empires. The world's first empire did not rise through superior weapons, vast resources, or military genius. It rose through something far less dramatic and far more powerful: administration. Sargon of Akkad built the first empire in history, not by winning heroic battles, but by mastering grain rations, standardized measures, organized labor, written oversight, and centralized control. The blueprint of empire was invented by accountants, not conquerors. Here is the part most textbooks avoid. The world's first empire was created by bureaucracy, not conquest. Why did administration, not warfare, become the decisive factor? Power didn't scale through violence, it scaled through systems. For centuries, Mesopotamia was a landscape of competing cities, each with its own temples, scribes, irrigation systems, and ruling elites. No single city dominated. Alliances shifted, conflicts erupted, religious centers rose and fell. But eventually, a new force appeared. Not a raiding tribe, not a wandering coalition, a structured, disciplined, and centrally managed power. Akkad. Empire began when the temple city model finally hit its ceiling. This is the moment the ancient world changes. The city is no longer the limit. A new idea enters human history. Empire. What happens when someone realizes the entire region can be run as one machine? Every city that once demanded autonomy now faced a power that demanded obedience. Akkad didn't rise in a vacuum. It rose because Mesopotamia was already primed for unification. Mesopotamian city-states had irrigation networks, labor, coordination, ration systems, scribal accounting, temple-based economies, early law codes, standardized weights and measures. This was a region ready for centralization, waiting for someone who understood the system. Why did no earlier ruler see that the entire structure was already half-built? Sargon of Akkad recognized a truth no ruler before him had grasped. Control the administrators, and you control the civilization. His breakthroughs were administrative, not military. A. The first standing army. Before Sargon, soldiers were seasonal farmers. He professionalized them, the first full-time military force in history. B. Centralized governance. He replaced local rulers with loyal governors. Grain, labor, and trade were standardized across conquered cities. C. Unified language. Akkadian became the administrative lingua franca, the first diplomatic language in recorded history. D. Integration, not erasure. Sargon absorbed Sumerian religion, ritual, and record-keeping. He didn't destroy the system. He scaled it. This is the twist most people miss. The first empire wasn't built by force alone. It was built by coordination. Tradition clashed with standardization in every city he absorbed. Conquest by clipboard. The world's first empire was an administrative merger. Empire created opportunities, but also contradictions. One city could be managed through tradition. Dozens required. Constant communication, reliable harvests, stable labor pools, obedient administrators, consistent taxation. A single drought or local rebellion could fracture the entire structure. How do you stabilize a system that depends on perfect coordination? Local elites resented Akkadian oversight. Temples resisted losing authority. Cities accustomed to independence struggled under centralized rule. These tensions simmered behind every policy. Local identity versus imperial standardization. Akkad borrowed heavily from Sumer. This prevented cultural collapse, but blurred identity lines. Many regions did not view the Akkadians as legitimate rulers. Unity was administrative, not emotional. Irrigation failures threatened the empire's food supply. Canals required constant maintenance. One failure in the chain endangered everything. Akkad never became a cohesive state. It was a network of dependencies held together by Sargon's relentless administration. And here is the turning point. When his successors failed to maintain the system, the First Empire became the first major imperial collapse. Akkad rose because it was organized. It fell because it was overextended. The world's first empire collapsed for the same reason it succeeded: its complexity. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Ancient empires were not built on strength. They were built on logistics. The real power of Akkad was not its army. It was the system behind the army. Grain tracking labor schedules, ration distributions, water management debt records, temple coordination, controlled trade routes, territorial audits. People imagined the ancient world dominated by swords. Mesopotamia was dominated by paperwork, or more accurately, clay work. Akkad proved that a civilization could be unified, not by culture, faith, or ethnicity, but by administration. Every empire that followed borrowed this principle. Babylon, Assyria, Persia, Rome, the Ottomans. The backbone of empire is not glory. It is organization. Empire is not conquest. Empire is coordination. Why do modern states still function on Akkadian principles? Akkad built the first imperial system, but it was only the beginning. Next comes Uruk, the clay tablet empire that perfected bureaucracy and redefined what a state could be. Empire 2.0 is about to begin. Clay, law, and control, the bureaucratic empire of Uruk. Uruk wasn't simply a kingdom. It wasn't just a dynasty. It was the first fully centralized, state-managed economy in human history. Here is the shock most people never hear. Uruk left behind more administrative records than entire medieval kingdoms combined. Thousands of tablets, every ration measured, every work, shift logged, every transaction archived. This empire didn't rule with terror. It ruled with clay, no swords needed, just tablets. Why does the most ancient empire look more bureaucratic than most modern ones? Authority by ledger. Control wasn't enforced, it was documented. After the collapse of Akkad, southern Mesopotamia fractured into competing powers. But from this instability, a new kind of state emerged, one that replaced conquest with coordination. Under Ur-Nammu, the city of Ur rose again, a towering ziggurat at its center, grain storehouses arranged like a grid, scribes pressing reeds into clay with mechanical precision, officials counting grain as if it were weaponry. This was not a warrior empire. It was a managerial one. And in this system, everything, food, labor, justice, work, passed through the machinery of administration. The heart of the empire wasn't the palace, it was the office. How did paperwork become the dominant force in the ancient world? Power shifted from warriors to administrators, creating tension between muscle and mathematics. The third dynasty of Ur redefined governance. Nearly every major activity, farming, herding, textile production, metalwork, fell under state control. Output wasn't suggested, it was assigned. Ur-3 functioned more like a regulated bureaucracy than an ancient kingdom. Clay tablets recorded grain rations, livestock accounts, labor assignments, tax obligations, land transfers, temple inventories, legal cases. This was the first society where daily life was systematically archived. Ur-Nammu's code predates Hammurabi by centuries. It introduced standardized fines, property protections, monetary penalties replacing blood revenge. A quiet revolution, justice moved from vengeance to regulation. Authority was layered with precision. Regional governors, temple administrators, scribal overseers, tax officials, agricultural inspectors. This was an empire built through documentation, not domination. Weights, volumes, and grain capacities were unified. This made taxation predictable and trade consistent, long before coins or currency existed. Why does Ur-3's system resemble a proto-corporate structure? Ur-3 wasn't ancient. It was early modernity wearing clay shoes. The strength of Ur-3 was also its vulnerability. The system was efficient and fragile. A disruption in irrigation, labor supply, or harvest could break the administrative chain. Ziggurats, canals, and workshops required massive coordinated labor. The state relied on seasonal forced labor ration-based workers, corvée service. The system consumed enormous human energy. A bureaucracy this large required perfect record-keeping. If scribes fell behind, the state lost track of grain land rights taxes, labor obligations. Most ancient kingdoms survived chaos. Ur-3 could not. While Ur-3 controlled internal life with precision, external threats grew. Amorite migrations from the west, Elamite incursions from the east. When the Elamites seized Ur, the administrative engine had no military solution. 5. Centralized fragility. Everything was interconnected. Economy, irrigation, law, labor, taxation. One fracture could collapse the entire system. Eventually, one did. The scribal class expanded while the military weakened. An imbalance with fatal consequences. What happens when a system becomes too complex to respond to real-world crisis? Precision, rigidity, collapse. Ur-3 was the first empire destroyed by paperwork failure. Here is the part most histories soften. Ur-3 wasn't only the first sophisticated state. It was the first state to collapse from over-administration. It wasn't culture that failed. It wasn't leadership. It was complexity. The more intricate the system became, the more vulnerable it was to drought invasion, labor shortages, miscommunication, bureaucratic backlog. Ur-3 revealed a pattern that every major empire would repeat. Civilization rises through administration and collapses when administration becomes too heavy to sustain. Babylon, Persia, Rome, the Ottomans. The blueprint of rise and fall began here. Efficiency is not stability. Sometimes it's the seed of collapse. Why do modern states echo Ur-3's vulnerabilities? The first regulated empire became the first over-regulated casualty. But Mesopotamia's story didn't end with Ur-3. A new era followed, one shaped by iron, ambition, and monumental architecture. Next, Assyria and Neo-Babylon, the empires that carried Mesopotamia's legacy into a new age. The paperwork fades, the war machine awakens. Fire and memory, Assyria, Babylon, and the lasting shadow of Mesopotamia. Assyria is remembered as a brutal war machine. Babylon is remembered as decadent and doomed. But here is the truth hidden behind the stereotypes. Assyria built one of the greatest libraries of the ancient world. Babylon became one of the largest cities on earth. Nineveh preserved tens of thousands of texts. Babylon reached a population of roughly 250,000 in the 6th century BCE, unmatched by most ancient capitals. How did violent and corrupt civilizations manage achievements that shaped world history? These so-called giants of destruction were actually giants of innovation. Mesopotamia wasn't just the birthplace of civilization. It was the template. From the northern plain rose Assyria, cities of colossal reliefs, fortified complexes, and administrative centers engineered for both power and record-keeping. Assur, Nimrud, Nineveh, stone lions, iron weapons, clay archives. Their ruins still carry the memory of a state that mastered warfare and mastered the preservation of knowledge. Nineveh once held a curated library, not myths scattered by chance, but astronomy, medicine, law, ritual, and administration, an intentional archive of human thought. Farther south, Babylon emerged as a different kind of giant. Monumental gates, ritual avenues, vast temple districts, engineered canals, and some of the most ambitious architecture in the ancient world. The modern world treats these cities as relics. They were not relics. They were prototypes. The Assyrian Empire, c. 906-12 BCE. Assyria's brutality is famous. Its sophistication is rarely acknowledged. Assyria was a pioneer of siege engineering, one of the earliest adopters of iron weaponry, a builder of long-distance roads, a manager of vast irrigation systems, a collector of scientific and literary knowledge. Under Ashurbanipal, Nineveh became the world's first deliberately organized library. Its tablets contained the Epic of Gilgamesh, medical treatises, astronomical observations, royal archives, legal and administrative records Assyria conquered to control. But archived to remember, Assyria didn't just conquer, it preserved. After Assyria fell, Babylon surged under Nabopolassar and reached new heights under Nebuchadnezzar II. Babylon's achievements included the Ishtar Gate extensive ceremonial walls, massive temple complexes, advanced urban planning, monumental architecture. Babylon fused religion, engineering, and political order into a single civic identity. And despite invasions, droughts, and geographic exposure, Mesopotamia continued producing empires, each building on the innovations of the last. The forces that made Mesopotamia powerful also made it vulnerable. Endless exposure. The same open plains that allowed agriculture and trade also allowed invasion. No mountains, no forests, no natural shields. The rivers that fed life also fed invaders. Imperial fatigue. Assyria exhausted itself through constant warfare. Babylon strained under monumental construction and ceremonial obligations. Power demanded more energy than either state could sustain. The rise of larger powers. Persia, Greece, and later Rome had larger populations and more resources. They viewed Mesopotamia not as a rival, but as a prize. Environmental strain, salt accumulation weakened fields. Rivers shifted. Canals failed. Agriculture, the foundation of every Mesopotamian empire, became unstable. Memory outlived power. Even as these empires fell, their law codes shaped later legal systems. Their architecture influenced future capitals. Their administrative methods defined early governments. Their libraries preserved intellectual traditions. Their writing systems recorded centuries of human experience. The cities collapsed. The ideas did not. Here is the final truth, the one that reframes the entire story. Mesopotamia didn't fall because it was weak. Mesopotamia fell because it succeeded. Its innovations made it wealthy, visible, and strategically essential. The rivers that fed its fields became highways for invaders. The knowledge preserved in its libraries was copied and carried off. The cities that defined urban life became prizes for rising powers. Mesopotamia didn't disappear. It was absorbed, piece by piece, into the civilizations that followed. Persia, Greece, Rome, Islam, Europe, the modern world, our governments, our laws, our cities, our record-keeping, our concept of history itself, all trace back to this narrow strip of land between two unpredictable rivers. Mesopotamia is not ancient. Mesopotamia is alive in everything we do. Civilization didn't begin in safety or abundance. It began in a landscape that forced humanity to innovate or die. From mud brick shrines to imperial capitals, Mesopotamia became humanity's first proving ground. And the world we inhabit today is its echo. Civilization didn't begin in safety. It began in a place where survival meant engineering the impossible. And now that you've walked through Mesopotamia's ruins, its rivers, its tablets, its empires, you can see the pattern clearly. We didn't inherit the modern world from brilliance. We inherited it from people who were desperate. Every law code, every ledger, every city street, every government office, all of it was born here, under pressure, in a land where failure came every season. And this is only the first chapter. Because while Mesopotamia learned to control water, Egypt learned to control time, a river that never broke its rhythm, a kingdom that rose and fell with a flood, a world where stability became a religion. That's the next story. And if you're starting to feel it, that pull, that sense that history is bigger, sharper, stranger than anything we were taught, good. This episode is just one piece of our book, World History, a visual journey from the dawn of civilization to the 21st century. If you want the deeper timeline, the full story behind these civilizations, you can find the link below or in the channel description. Welcome to History Brought Alive, where forgotten stories rise from the ashes and legends walk again. If this opened your eyes, follow, subscribe, and don't miss the next chapter, because this journey has only begun.